Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Rudy Page, and welcome to another of our chapter from my life and book. And this program we have with us, Mervyn Weir. Mervyn, good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here.
Great to see you again. So Mervyn, before we start, tell us a bit about yourself and your background, family background.
Well, my family background is a mixture of Jamaican and Grenadian.
Okay. Okay.
So,
yeah.
And I spent a few early years in Grenada myself.
Right.
Yeah, that mixed heritage.
Yes, of course. Mixed like me, Monstrasian and Jamaican. So, I guess the big question in terms of I Can't Breathe, which we're going to talk about, as we approach the second anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, it's really great that you've been able to take the time to join us. And one of the things that many of us do have to think about was, of course, that the whole world was impacted by the murder of George Floyd. Many people made their feelings known by protesting. So why did you choose to write a book?
I didn't choose to write a book. I guess we all deal with trauma in different ways. You know, some people go for a run, some people pray, they meditate, you know, whatever. I do all of those, but none of those dealt with this issue in a way that made me feel satisfied or at peace. And the images that we all saw just kept running around in my head, and I just had to find a way to deal with it. And for me, writing is often the way. So I just wrote and wrote. I didn't even think, I didn't plan, I just wrote. And when I'd finished getting it out of my system, I realized when I shared it with others that there was something there, because when they heard it, they said, you really need to share this. So the book really came about as a result of trying to personally deal with that trauma, but in the end, maybe try to do something positive with it.
Yeah, okay. So it's not just an ordinary book though, is it? Because it's beautifully produced and illustrated throughout. So why did you think it was important to illustrate this as a topic? Well,
like I said, I never planned to write it, so I hadn't planned to illustrate it either.
Of course.
But nonetheless, when I shared it and people said, listen, you need to publish this, you know, this needs a wider exposure.
Yeah.
As soon as that thought was expressed, I knew in my spirit that I had to illustrate it.
Yes.
And that could be because I'm a designer, you know, and thinking visually is important to me. But it was also because, you know it's a cliche, but we say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And pictures help us to go under the radar with some of these very sensitive issues. And I also wanted the book to be appealing to young people. And young people are very much driven by imagery, you know. And in my mind, I also thought it could be useful for schools. And again, I thought the images would be particularly useful if teachers wanted to engage young people. They could even just look at the pictures and ask them questions around the pictures. So, yeah. And I think the pictures also give you a new or different way of looking at the same subject.
Yeah, they certainly do. I mean, there's a term that we use, you know, we say the means of communication may be different, but the needs are the same, which is essentially what you're really saying when you look at different means of communication.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of one of the images in particular that talks about colorization. So we can talk about it, and we can talk about skin tone and, you know, and how impactful it can be in our lives. You can show one picture and that is illustrated in a second, and you don't have to think about it, it's just there.
Yeah. I understand that even before the book was published, you produced an award-winning film version. Tell us about that.
Well, yeah, as you know, the George Floyd murder coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. So this whole came to me during that lockdown period. And I knew it'd take, especially because I was working on the illustrations, it would take a little while to publish the book. And I wanted to share the message as quickly as possible. And so, there was a real challenge there, how to do that during lockdown.
Yeah.
And I've got experience of, doing plays and drama and doing films. And I would have a particular way of doing that in terms of engaging professional actors and so on. But that wasn't an option at this time. So what came to me was, how can I get this done quickly and get it out? And it was really just to engage people who were sympathetic to the message and get them to do sections of it on their own phone and just send it in so that we could edit it and then put it out for a wider audience. And I think, because of the timing, many people got to see it during that lockdown period, and also close enough to the time of the murder where it was still very much part of our conversation. And there was something very impactful. It was not high production values because everyone's phone was different. And there was no real rehearsal or planning. Everyone just did it and sent it in. But there was something about that raw response. And everyone just giving their own emotional take on it, but using the words that are in the book. And it seemed to resonate with people, and that was just a way to share it as quickly as possible. And thankfully, people thought it was worth giving some kind of response and an award to.
And again, and we know in uncertain times it calls for creativity. And so, and looking at things differently, and we've already said about the means of communication being different, but the needs are the same. So, and of course, from what you're saying as well, probably there was a sense of unity amongst people in terms of being able to give that message. And again, as we know, you need unity to solve some of life's most complex problems anyway.
I think that's one of the strongest things that's come out of this. And as we look back on 2 years, we need to reevaluate to what extent that unity is still there, and to what extent we're still as committed as we were when we were first exposed to that terrible incident.
That's another program on its own, I can tell you.
Okay.
I'll invite you back for that one when it comes up. But so in the introduction to the book, there's an arresting segment called Say Their Names. Tell us about that and why you felt it was important to include it.
Yeah, there's a tendency, and I think it's fueled very much by the way the media does things, is to make simple stories because the real story is more complex and might take longer to share. And very often with incidents, we associate them with one people, and one people becomes the center and the focus of a story, when the more nuanced version would involve more people. And so George Floyd becomes this, global symbol of oppression, of white intolerance, of, policing that's gone wrong. And yet, when we deconstruct what really happened, he's only that focus because his story was caught, the police were caught in the act, if you like. And so we all saw that, and because of social media, it got shared quickly. But it was very important in putting the book that, to me, he's the catalyst for the story, but he isn't the whole story. And Say Their Names attempts to put on paper all of the names, or at least many of the names up until now. And we have the American names on one side and the British names on the other. And when you hear the stories from other people, you know that if your child or your spouse or your relative is the one that's being killed, you want their name to be recognized.
Yeah.
You want people to know their name and to know their story.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to put those names there so that, you know, anyone who was involved or connected with losing a life, losing a loved one, would, you know, would have the feeling that, yes, that their loved one was also recognized. And so that we can move away from just focusing on one person. You know, if it was your relative, you know, you've got a story to tell, and you want that story to be told, and not everyone consumed with just one other story that the media is focused on. Absolutely.
There are some powerful endorsements for the book, including the foreword by the chair of the Booker Prize jury, Margaret Bushy. Definitely a history, Busby, sorry. Definitely a history heavyweight. Robin Walker, and the popular music writer, poet and presenter, Professor Benjamin Zephaniah. So the book has obviously been a deep and positive, has made a deep and positive impression. But what were your hopes when you wrote it?
Yeah, after I'd, you know, exercised the need to deal with personal trauma, as it were, seeing that, and it was a kind of reminder. One of the themes, the key theme of the book, is it's not hard to see a pattern here, because it works backwards from George Floyd and looks at a, you know, global historical picture of the colonial project, and what you see is a pattern that keeps getting repeated. And unfortunately, that pattern looks different today, but it's still, the essence of it is still there.
Yeah.
So one of the hopes was for people to see the pattern. You know, it's so easy to look at any particular period of history and you just focus on that. You might just focus on the transatlantic slave trade and think it's just there. But when you, I think what the book shows is that that pattern has gone back further. You know, it started before then and it carried on after then. And so my hope is that people can really see that when we talk about systemic racism, we can see that there is a system, there's a structure. It hasn't happened by accident, and it hasn't only happened to, you know, African people. It's happened in Australia, it's happened in South America, it's happened all over the world. Wherever that colonial, you know, project has gone, you have seen the same pattern. So that was one of my hopes. And another hope for me was to get young people engaged with seeing this history. And, you know, everyone, we're all children of our own time, and therefore, but we can focus, you know, on our own time and not see that our time is indeed connected, you know, with the period that came before it and before it and before it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a positive and a negative to that. The positive is that we stand on giant shoulders. We haven't emerged in a vacuum, you know, and we can only do things and have the opportunities that we have today because of our parents and what they did.
Absolutely.
But we also need, but there's a negative side to the history that's gone before. And we can see that in the way that people have, you know, looked at these statues and said, you know, we've got to take down these statues. They represent a history, a time before us, but, you know, we want to change that narrative. So you know, I think it's really important to see that we're connected to history and we're connected to each other. And I hope the pattern that's shown in the book, you know, that's something that people can take some learning from or some inspiration from.
Okay. So just before we close, where can people get the book? Where can they find out what you're doing and your next project? In fact, before you tell us that, what is your next project? Given it's Windrush 75 next year, which obviously is an important timeline from the Caribbean community perspective here in the UK.
Yeah, it is. I do want to do something big for Windrush 75, as it were.
Yeah.
But at the moment, this year is a very significant year in itself because it's the 60th anniversary of Jamaican independence.
Yeah.
And in that regard, I've got I've got two projects. One is a visual project, and one is a production project to do with theatre. But the visual project is re-looking at the Jamaican national heroes. Anyone who's seen them will be familiar that you normally see them as black and white line drawings or photographs, and all disparate because they're created by different people at different times. So I have recreated those portraits using the national colors, and so it kind of unified them so they look dynamic and hopefully will draw attention to Jamaican history. And and not only the national heroes that have been designated, but there's a big cry as well to designate a few more modern ones like Bob Marley and maybe Usain Bolt and Louise Bennett. I think some of the leading choices there. Yeah, and the book is available from Crick Crack. Crick Crack is the publishing house of the book. That's KRIKKRAK, crickcrack.com.
Got a copy of the book here. I don't know if anybody people will be able to see it. It's a very good book. Excellent, excellent. Right, thanks a lot for that. And look forward to hearing more about your Jamaica project. And I must say, for our Trinidadian cousins, it's also Trinidad and Tobago 60 as well this year. So yeah, it's great. So thank you very much for that, Mervyn.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.